For today's video, we're going to be talking about a little bit more interesting aspect of game design, and that's going to be examining what the structure of your game is. Why this is a very more nebulous aspect when it comes to designing a game, and why the best games can keep to a structure, some can break a structure, and some can have no structure at all. Structure, in this respect, is an extension of what your core gameplay loop is. What is someone be doing minute to minute, moment to moment of your game? But this kind of grows in this idea of the kind of plan that you're going to have level by level, biome by biome, world by world, etc. And the reason why structure matters in this respect is that it can serve several purposes. The first is that it provides the player with a blueprint for what to expect or what they should be getting as they go from level to level. A classic example of a blueprint would be something like the dungeons in any Zelda game. You go into a dungeon, you know there's going to be some treasure you're going to need, the boss key, boss actual fight, and of course the MacGuffin that's going to move you forward. Structure in this respect, again, provides a guide for the designer in terms of how they should be building their game. Now, as I said in the stinger, there's definitely various spectrums of how much you should adhere or ignore a structure to your title. Because it would be easy just to say, just come up with a fixed standard that's going to apply to every single level and your game will be perfect. It doesn't work like that. And the game adheres too much to a very rigid structure. Okay, every level is exactly 6.5 minutes. At 3 minutes and 20 seconds, there's going to be a mini boss. Get to the final boss at exactly 5 minutes and 20 seconds. And this is what we kind of saw with people trying to math out the perfect game. It doesn't really work that way. The goal of the structure for the designer, again, is to give you some glue that holds each one of your environments together. That when you're having trouble figuring out what you want to build a level around, what you're going to be doing next, your structure can provide you with some measure of a guide forward. Now, the other point about a good structure, and what we see it kind of more popularized today, is that structure provides the player with information of what is going to happen next. And this is a major aspect that we talk about with roguelike and roguelike design. That the player knows in each level, in each generated map, whatever, the basic things that are going to appear. If we're talking about the biome Isaac, every floor is going to have a shop, a treasure room, a boss fight. Now what's inside those rooms, of course, is entirely different each and every time. Structure can also be used as a means of getting the player excited about what's about to happen. One of the more famous examples, of course, is the treasure chest opening jingle from any Zelda game. Well, we've been recently playing with all the Ys games, and the key item get music that's going to be stuck in my head for a very long time. These memorable moments and these elements that the player knows, it allows them again to start getting excited. Now, a popular trick that level designers can use is you'll enter a new area, and there'll be the treasure door, something bright and shiny way in the distance. You know it's there, you know you're going to get it, you just don't know when. And when you finally get past all the traps, the monsters, the bosses, and all that, you are gung-ho to open up that door, get that treasure, and see just what amazing shiny you have finally gotten. Another point about structure and when it can work is that it gives the player that feeling that something good is about to happen. And it helps a lot in player retention. Now this is of course provided that the game is holding their attention to begin with. If your game is bad, no amount of jingles or treasure chests or whatnot is going to keep them playing. But this feeling of anticipation, of again, knowing that there's something cool or different or surprising or whatever around the corner, can be enough to keep them playing. We've talked a long time, or we talked many times before, about that just one more turn, just one more upgrade, one more factory, whatever, that gets you excited to keep playing. And when we look at games that can adhere to a very specific structure like this works really well in casual, or again, games that are meant to be very catchy or very exciting to play. A great example of this comes from Plants vs. Zombies, that every time you beat a level in Plants vs. Zombies, you unlock something new. You don't know what it is. Could be a new plant, could be a new upgrade, could be a new game mode. You just know when you beat a level, you get something. We tried out a game from an indie developer earlier this year that was supposed to be like their homage to Plants vs. Zombies. And it was a very solid take, but it had that issue where nothing was happening. Instead of you getting something every level, you maybe get something every 3 levels, 5 levels, 4 levels, 8 levels. You just don't know. And when the player doesn't have an idea about when something exciting is going to happen, when the game is going to change or grow or reward them, they oftentimes get bored. And it's oftentimes where we see from a lot of first-time or newer developers where the churn really gets at them. That, yes, your game may have 500 levels, 10,000 levels, 800 million levels. But if the player just sees themselves doing the same exact thing again and again and again, maybe that level 1652 is when the game is going to really take off. How many people are going to play the game that long? And this is oftentimes why we see developers struggle with retention. Because yes, the game could be amazing, could be interesting and cool and all that, but if it's not doing enough to keep the player invested, if there's nothing that's kind of guiding them from level to level, biome to biome, world to world, whatever, they're going to end up getting bored. And yes, there will, of course, be people that are going to push through it. You will have your hardcore fans who will play every single level and do every single challenge and achievement and bonus, and they'll do 100%, maybe 110%. But most people are not going to get that far. And when this ends up happening, they're going to end up just leaving your game. And again, this is where we can see titles that they get very niche and rabid fan bases, but a lot of people just don't want to play. They're just not keeping the vast market. And returning to Plants vs. Zombies, the other point about having a structure in this respect is that it also led to mid and long-term rewards. That every 4 or 5 levels, you get the minigame. At the end of the world, you get the kind of bonus challenge. And these, again, they provide structure, but they also break up the normal pacing of a game. Some of the most memorable levels that we've seen from plenty of action titles is when things change. It becomes an auto-scroller. This is the tank piloting level. Now you're shooting enemies in a ship. You can have something like Battletoads, where every single level is its own unique thing that keeps the player guessing, and in that game's case, throwing their controller against the wall as to what comes next. And when we look at games that work with their structure, it's about getting the player to feel invested, to know what is somewhat going to happen up next. They walk into a new area. Okay, I know there's going to be a boss. I know there's going to be an upgrade. Whatever. Now, as we've said, if you want to have a very fixed structure, it can work if your game is going to be very kind of rigid, or you're not expecting a long playthrough. If it's only 3 hours, maybe like 3 to 8 hours, then yeah, if you want things to be very structured, very strict in that respect, you can do that. Now, when we start getting to higher numbers, 50 hours, 80 hours, 100 hours, whatever, there's gotta be something to mix things up. Because again, people are going to start to realize, okay, it's just been the same thing for the last 30 hours. There's 70 more hours in this game. Okay, I'm going to assume I'm going to be doing this for all that time. So here's where it gets very interesting. when you purposely break your structure. Because one of the things that we've seen, especially from indie developers and kind of newer developers from the 2010s on, has of course been trying to do things different. We can talk about different in terms of new mechanics and game systems, mixing things up. But we can also talk about when games try to pull the rug out from under the player. And you can see this in some of the more celebrated titles. One of the most famous examples of the rug pull, of course, is from Portal. The whole time you play Portal, it is a puzzle game about each level being its own set of rooms. That's what you do. And then what happens near the end? The game then forces you into one final section. And the final test of Portal is really well done because not only does it build off of everything the player has learned up until that point, but it then throws out the general conventions and asks you to adapt. And I mean, for anyone watching this, did any of you guess the twist of Portal on your very first time playing that game sight unseen? Probably most of you didn't. I know I didn't. And it was just such a great moment in going through it. But you see, the trick about the rug pull is you can really only do it one time. You can't just keep throwing your game around like that every 20 minutes or every hour. Because the other risk about structure in this respect is that if the people or your audience like how the game flow is, completely upending that for something different, you can end up alienating or removing the thing that kept people excited about it. And this can also lead into a greater discussion about games, especially those who go through early access, that add or rapidly change how the game is played. That it's almost a fundamentally different game going from the very first version, to so on, to 5 months in, a year in, and how many more it takes to get the game out. Another aspect about having a structure to your game is how much you inform the player about it. As we said, with classic game examples like the Zelda games, like any Metroidvania that we've ever played, the structure is very much well known. You go into a new biome, a new stage, a new map, whatever, you have an idea of what you're going to get. But in keeping with how much indie development has really changed what game design is and what we do with our designs, we've seen examples of games, especially brutally difficult or very esoteric designs, that purposely don't tell the player what the structure of the game is going to be about. Now, this is not the same as having an open-ended title, such as a Factorio or a Dyson Sphere, where after the tutorial, the game just says, do whatever you want. What we're talking about are games where you have no real idea what the game expects of you, what you should be expecting of the game, and it's a mystery as to how everything is going to unfold, or how many minutes or hours you're going to play. And we often see this in a lot of challenging games. Probably two recent examples would be stuff like Fear and Hunger and Look Outside. That both of those games, if you go into them completely blind, you don't know what's going to happen in them. The game is not telling you, go over there, or pick that up, or you should just be doing this and this and this. And that is where a lot of the challenge and why those games got very popular. But what we often see in games that hide or, again, obscure their pacing and their structure like this, is that is part of the difficulty curve. Yes, you'll know what is going to happen, but on your 5th, 10th, 15th playthrough, you have a pretty good idea of which rooms you want to go into, which items you should be searching for. And what happens is that once these games have been solved, that is oftentimes it for any kind of difficulty. With Fear and Hunger and Fear and Hunger 2, there are people, I've watched some of the streams and stream recordings, who have utterly mastered those games, that it is easy to play Fear and Hunger now. Now, of course, that took a lot of playthroughs, a lot of guides, references, getting information online. But it happened. And what we see from games like this is that once that magic is lost, that's kind of when they are done. It is a different kind of structure again compared to one that's built on proc gen or on the unpredictability of what's going to happen. You're never going to reach a point in a roguelike where the entire game is solved, that you know exactly what's going to happen on every single run, every single item is going to be fixed. That's not the point of playing those games. And part of defining the structure of your game, much like with defining the core gameplay loop, is, once again, who's the market for this game? If you're aiming your game for hardcore shooter fans, then what do they kind of expect going from level to level? They want extreme challenges. They want varieties of arenas. If you're making more of a comical or a very easy to get into shooter, what is kind of the attraction there? And once again, if you can't answer these questions about what your core gameplay loop is, what the structure of your game is, you're oftentimes going to end up with a game that just feels very confused in terms of what you're doing. You can't say your game is a very slow-paced, mile-a-minute, high-octane, stealthy, story-driven cooking, space sim, first-person shooter, real-time strategy. Although someone may actually make that game, who knows? When you define a structure, again, this is when you start drawing that line in the sand as to what your game is going to be about. And conversely, what your game is not going to be about. If people are going into a survival horror game, and your structure and your core gameplay loop is about running around with metal blaring while you blast enemies, that's not really working for survival horror. If every level, every environment of your game is completely different and keeps the player guessing, that can, in a way, be its own structure. We're going to get very philosophical and say that no structure is also a form of structure. And there are examples of games that can get away with that you never know what is going to happen next. But as we've said, the more you mix things up, the more things are changing or being completely different, level by level and so on, the more you risk alienating people who like one part of your game. The more genres, more systems, more mechanics means that you're going to be aiming for a smaller and smaller audience. This is Future Josh with a quick addition for this video. A common kind of issue that I've been seeing a lot of newer indie developers make when it comes to the structure and pacing is when they are greatly embellishing the moment-to-moment gameplay. So a good example of this is I've been seeing from a lot of deck builders where it's no longer about you take a card, put it down, or use it. Now we have to tweak aspects of the card, or it's no longer just hitting different units. You have to build like this entire little mini game, or you have to completely customize your attack each and every turn, rather than just hit a button to attack, hit a button to defend, play the block card. You get the picture. And the reasoning for this is that developers are trying to find ways of standing out from everyone else. As we've said, so many people have tried to copy the Slay the Spire formula, and they've done nowhere near the same amount of numbers of that. So if you can make your deck builder different, if you can change how cards work, or dice, or anything like that, that can oftentimes be the major selling point. But the trap you need to be aware of is that video games, and by extension, popular game mechanics, don't exist in a vacuum. If your game is in the same genre as someone else's, and their game allows you to play it 3 to 5 times faster than yours, a lot of people aren't going to stick around for it. And it's why we talk so much about playtesting and examining the market. Because having really creative ideas is a great idea. However, if that idea balloons the amount of time that used to take 2 to 3 seconds to 15 to 40 seconds, it's going to become very frustrating. And action commands are a huge example of this. And I know I made a video about this a few years ago, where the original idea of an action command was to provide reward and a kind of a skill test for players. If they pass it, they beat the fight noticeably quicker. That was the whole point of Super Mario RPG and that particular style. What we've seen from a lot of indie developers today, and especially something like with like Expedition, what was it, 33 or 30, was that now the QTEs are this massive game of, I'm going to attack, but no, I'm not. But yes, I am, but here it comes. Now you have to listen for a bell. Now the bell doesn't exist. Now you have to pay attention to the colored lights, and then the camera turns, and the camera pans and zooms and does all this. And if you don't do it, well, this fight now takes 20 extra minutes. Or if you do it correctly, that's considered the normal way of fighting it. And we've lost count, I think, here, the amount of indie RPGs where the action command system feels so kind of out of tune that it just becomes this case of, did you do the command right? Yeah, you do normal damage. You've missed it? Now the enemy does penta damage on you and you're dead. Or now instead of taking 40 minutes for you to win this fight, now it only takes 20. But the point is that this is where you want to look at ways of speeding up and mitigating any downtime in your game. If you can take something that took 40 seconds to a minute to do and get that down to 15 to 20 seconds, that's going to be a far greater improvement. And to go back to the other point, this is why playtesting matters. Because you can oftentimes find clever solutions to these issues by looking at how people are playing your game. Because at the end of the day, if your high-octane action game, where you're swinging swords and shooting guns, and it takes 20 minutes before you actually swing that sword or fire that gun, a lot of people are just going to end up getting bored and leaving for faster pastures down the line. To wrap things up for this video, structure and pacing in this respect allow you to set definitions of what your game is going to be about and what your core gameplay loop is going to be doing, area by area, level by level, world by world, chapter by chapter, whatever. When it's too strict, it can lead to your game feeling very repetitive. If it's too open, it can become very aimless. And open world or very non-linear games can suffer in this respect. That if the player has no guidance to what they're doing, if you just drop them in the middle of a map that's the size of Europe and just say, press WSAD to move around, okay, you're done, go play our game, a lot of people are just going to turn off that game and never play it again. Again, as we said earlier, there will be people who will struggle and love that struggle to do every single thing and figure it all out. But you need to give the player something. There has to be some semblance of an idea of what the game is expecting of you. If you are dropped in the middle of a giant map, are you supposed to kill everything? Build towns, factories, farms? Are you supposed to get off the planet? Swim in the planet? Dig into the planet? And we oftentimes see from a lot of developers when they're first starting out, or some novice developers, that they love this idea of do everything. We're not going to tell you what to do. Do whatever you want. Okay, but if I don't know what any of this stuff is, or I don't know what I'm even supposed to be playing this game about, why should I spend the next 5, 10, 20 hours trying to figure out what your game is supposed to be? And open world and open-ended titles like this, when there is no structure, or the structure is so bare that the player quickly gets out and they're just completely lost, can feel very frustrating. It's why we talk about onboarding as such an important aspect of a good gameplay loop and of good design, especially UI UX. And again, you can throw the player to the wolves. You just need to tell them not to, run around with stakes around their neck. So here's a final question for you. Can you think of examples of games that did a really great job in terms of their structure, whether it is being very strict, very open, and anywhere in between? And returning to the idea of the rug pull, Are there any other great examples of games that completely blindsided you? And that seems to be something that's happening rarer and rarer these days, especially with the YouTube, Twitch audiences watching and scanning every single game. But has there been a game that just completely took you by surprise and just changed what you thought of it? And as a bonus question, what do you think about open-ended games? How much structure should there be? Should we get an hour-long tutorial? 10 seconds? Should the player be given some idea about what they should be doing? And when do you think the whole kind of just drop them off with no information can work? And how would you make that work to at least give someone a fighting chance? So with that, for the structure of these videos, thank you so much for watching, and I will see everyone for our next design chat. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.